The sun hung low over the jagged mesas of the southwest, casting long, trembling shadows across the arid land. Dust clung to her boots and her faded dress, the fabric coarse against her sunburned skin. She had been walking for hours, her feet sore, her stomach gnawing with hunger. Yet she pressed on, driven by a need stronger than exhaustion or fear. Each step carried the weight of uncertainty, but also a fragile hope, the hope that someone, somewhere might give her a chance. Her name was Clara, though she often wished for one that sounded braver, stronger, less like a girl who wandered alone into the desert. She had left her small hometown in the east, a place of narrow streets and narrow minds, seeking work that would keep her alive. Letters she had sent ahead, seeking employment, had returned unanswered or stamped with curt refusals. The world seemed to have no place for her, no role that didn't involve bending, breaking, or disappearing entirely. Now, at the edge of a small Apache settlement, she stopped and surveyed her surroundings. The village was modest but well kept, with wooden structures smoothed by years of wind and sun, and smoke curling gently from the central hearths. Children laughed and chased each other across the dusty ground, and older women worked diligently with woven baskets, their hands moving with the quiet certainty of experience. A few men repaired fences, and in their presence Clara felt both invisible and exposed. Her voice shook as she took a step forward, dust rising in small spirals from her worn shoes. "Excuse me," she called softly, almost timidly, yet loud enough to carry over the clatter of daily life. I am looking for work. Anything. I can cook, clean, help with chores, whatever you need." The words felt fragile, trembling on her tongue, like a bird unsure of its first flight. The village seemed to pause. The laughter dimmed. The movement slowed. Eyes turned to her, some curious, some cautious, all assessing. She tried to keep her posture straight, to mask the trembling of her hands, but her chest tightened as though the air itself had thickened. Her plea sounded pitiful even to herself, yet it was all she had. A young Apache man stepped from the shadows of the communal hall. He was tall, with dark eyes that seemed to see too much, and a presence that commanded attention without a word. Clara felt a flutter of panic and awe, as if her courage were suddenly inadequate in the face of him. He didn't smile or speak immediately. He simply studied her, tilting his head slightly as if weighing the sincerity in her voice. Her stomach clenched. She had been rejected so many times before that she expected a polite dismissal, perhaps a curt shake of the head and a return to her wandering. Instead, she was met with silence, and that silence, more than any word, spoke volumes. It was the first judgment she had encountered that didn't presume weakness or desperation, but rather asked her, silently, to prove herself. She swallowed hard, trying to quell the quiver in her throat. I don't mean to impose," she said, her voice catching once more. "I just need a chance, please." She didn't know what else to say. She had no bargaining chips, no impressive credentials, no connections. All she had was the raw honesty of her need, the unvarnished truth of a life teetering on the edge of collapse. The young Apache's gaze didn't waver. He took a step closer, and Clara braced herself, unsure whether she would be turned away or worse, met with anger. Yet something in his eyes was different from anything she had seen before, a quiet, steady curiosity, tempered with patience. For the first time in days, maybe weeks, she felt a flicker of hope that perhaps, just perhaps, this place might give her more than survival. It might offer her a chance to belong, and so she stood, hands folded in front of her, the heat of the desert sun pressing down, her voice shaking but her spirit holding on. She didn't yet know that the man before her would change everything, nor that her request for work would ignite a chain of events that would challenge every expectation she had ever held about love, life, and partnership. For now, all that mattered was this moment, fragile and uncertain, at the threshold of something she could not yet name, but instinctively knew she could not walk away from. Clara's heart thumped like a drum in her chest as the young Apache man continued to watch her. He didn't speak, yet his presence filled the space between them, commanding attention without a single word. She could feel the weight of his gaze, steady, unflinching, and curious. Every instinct in her told her to retreat, to apologize and disappear into the desert dust. But something deep inside resisted. She had come too far to turn back now. The villagers observed silently, some from the shade of their homes, others from behind woven curtains. The children had paused in their games, their eyes wide with fascination, perhaps sensing the unusual tension between the newcomer and the young man who seemed to hold the authority of both youth and wisdom. There was a quiet dignity in the way the Apache man moved, deliberate yet effortless, each gesture measured, each expression precise. Clara felt exposed under his gaze, but also strangely seen, as if he could read the fear, determination, and raw honesty in her soul. Finally, he spoke, his voice calm but firm. "You ask for work," he said. The words were not a question but an acknowledgement. "Do you understand what you are asking? Life here is not easy. It is not like the towns you have left behind." Clara swallowed hard, her throat dry. I understand. I can work. I will do whatever is needed." Her voice was steadier now, bolstered by the resolve that had carried her across the barren miles. She tried to meet his eyes, hoping to convey sincerity rather than desperation. The man's gaze softened ever so slightly, and he nodded, though his expression remained unreadable to her. "Work," he repeated as though tasting the word, weighing its meaning. "Yes, but work is not the same for everyone. Some work is simple. Some work requires strength of body, some strength of spirit." Clara blinked. She had never thought of work in such a way. In every town she had passed, work had been transactional, devoid of deeper meaning. Here it seemed that to be part of the community, one had to prove something more profound, something she wasn't entirely sure she possessed. The young man stepped closer, giving her a better view of the settlement. He gestured toward the children and the women, then toward the structures and the fields beyond. "Everything here has purpose," he said. "Every person, every task. Nothing is wasted. If you wish to join us, you must understand that." "Do you?" Clara nodded quickly, her mind racing. She wanted this more than anything. Not just the chance to survive, but the chance to belong, to matter in a place where her presence could make a difference. "Yes," she said firmly. "I want to understand. I will learn. I will do what is needed." A faint smile, almost imperceptible, touched the corners of the man's mouth. It wasn't warmth exactly, but a recognition, a subtle acknowledgement that she had passed the first test simply by showing courage and honesty. He turned slightly, motioning for her to follow him. "Then walk with me," he said. "See what life here requires. Listen, watch, learn. And remember, we do not take lightly those who come to us asking for help." Clara's steps faltered, then strengthened, as she matched his pace. She noticed the precision with which he moved, the way his eyes scanned the environment, the way the villagers instinctively gave him space and respect. It was clear he was not merely a young man of the village, he was a leader, a protector, and someone who measured each action before committing to it. As they walked, Clara felt a mixture of awe and apprehension. This was no ordinary encounter. The settlement, the people, and especially the man at her side were entirely new to her. Every step felt like entering a world where rules were different, expectations higher, and the stakes far greater than she had ever imagined. Yet despite the uncertainty, a flicker of excitement stirred within her. For the first time, she realized that asking for work was more than survival. It was an invitation into a life she had never known. And as the young Apache man led her further into the heart of the village, Clara understood that first impressions were not just about appearances. They were about judgment, understanding, and the unspoken challenge of proving oneself worthy of trust, respect, and perhaps something even deeper. Clara had followed him through the settlement, her eyes taking in the rhythm of the village life, the careful tending of crops, the women skillfully weaving baskets, the men repairing fences and tools with quiet concentration. She had assumed her role would be ordinary, even menial, carrying water, tending animals, cleaning. She had prepared herself for that, for the work of survival. But the words that came next made her stop in her tracks. The young Apache man paused near a low wooden structure, the midday sun casting sharp shadows on his angular features. He looked directly at her, his dark eyes steady and unwavering. "I don't need a servant," he said. Clara blinked. The words seemed to hang in the air, heavy and impossible to grasp. She opened her mouth to respond, but no sound came. Her mind scrambled, trying to make sense of what she had just heard. She had expected refusal, perhaps caution, but never this. Never this declaration. I'm sorry?" she stammered, her voice trembling, betraying the shock that ran through her entire body. She took an involuntary step back. I thought, I could help. I can cook, clean, work, I need... She trailed off, realizing that the words she had practiced over and over now sounded weak, almost ridiculous. He shook his head slightly as if gently correcting her assumptions. I said, he repeated, slower this time, I don't need a servant. I need a wife. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Clara's stomach dropped, a sudden mix of fear, confusion, and disbelief flooding her senses. She had never been spoken to like this. Never had anyone define her value not by the work she could perform, but by the life they envisioned together. Her first thought was indignation. How dare he presume? How dare he assume her place in his life? But his eyes, calm, certain, unwavering, held no presumption, no arrogance. There was something in the way he said it that was different from the men she had known. This was not about control or ownership. It was not a transaction. It was a declaration of desire for partnership, for shared life. It was bold and it was real. I don't understand, Clara whispered, her voice catching as she struggled to process his words. Her hands twisted in front of her, and for a moment she wondered if she should turn and run. She had come seeking work, yes, but this was a proposition that demanded a different kind of courage. He stepped closer, but not in a threatening way. He spoke again, softer now, yet every word deliberate. Life here is not for those who wish only to serve. It is for those who are willing to stand beside another, to share responsibility, to face hardships together. That is what I offer. That is what I seek. Not a servant. A partner. A wife. Clara felt her pulse race. She had imagined being accepted for her work, for her diligence, perhaps even for her survival instinct, but never for her spirit. Never as someone who could walk beside another as an equal in life's challenges. The audacity of his words, the certainty behind them, sent a thrill mingled with fear through her veins. And yet, beneath her shock, a strange curiosity began to stir. Could she step into a world like this? Could she embrace a life that demanded courage not just for survival, but for love and partnership? She realized that this moment, this sudden, startling declaration was the first crack in the walls she had built around herself. Her voice, though still trembling, found strength in the midst of confusion. I've never been asked that before, she said. I don't know if I am ready for that. He nodded, acknowledging her honesty without judgment. Then you will learn. Life will teach you, and you will see if it is what your heart seeks. But understand this. I do not offer you servitude. I offer a life shared. That is my truth. That is my desire. Clara swallowed, her mind spinning with questions and possibilities. Her journey had begun with trembling words, seeking only work. Now the path ahead had shifted entirely. She realized that stepping forward meant risking more than her pride. It meant opening her heart to a life she had never dared to imagine. The sun was beginning its slow descent behind the mesas, casting the settlement in a warm, golden glow. Yet Clara felt a chill of uncertainty creeping over her. She had expected work, tasks, maybe even a simple acceptance if she proved herself useful. She had not expected a proposal, an offer of partnership that carried weight she did not yet understand. Her mind spun with questions, each one louder than the last, but the young Apache man walked beside her with calm assurance, as if the answers would come in time. Clara's confusion was immediate and profound. In her world, women who worked outside the home were granted independence, but this was different. She had grown up in towns where marriages were formalities, often built on convenience or expectation, not the raw, direct declaration she had just encountered. Here the man had not asked her to perform menial labor. He had asked her to imagine a life beside him, one that would bind her to a community whose rules she barely understood. Why would you offer me this? She finally asked, her voice breaking the silence. I am not part of your people. I do not know your ways. I am a stranger. He looked at her then, his expression patient but penetrating. I see the truth in you, he said simply. I see your courage, your willingness to step forward despite fear. That is rare. That is why you are not simply a stranger, and why I do not see you as a servant. This is not about where you come from. It is about who you are. Clara struggled to absorb his words. In her mind, the notion of worthiness had always been measured by skills, obedience, or social connections. Here, worthiness was measured by integrity, spirit, and the willingness to embrace life on its own terms. It was a lesson she had never learned, and the weight of it pressed on her chest. As they walked through the village, She noticed small details she had overlooked before. The way elders greeted him with respect, the subtle signals of recognition from the women, the unspoken hierarchy that governed daily life. Everything was structured yet fluid. She realized that accepting his offer would mean more than saying yes. It would mean understanding and adapting to these cultural expectations, learning to live within a framework that was as unfamiliar to her as it was sacred. Her mind raced. Could she learn their customs quickly enough? Could she honor them without losing herself? The thought of failure terrified her. She had already survived so much by relying on her own instincts. Now she faced the possibility that her instincts might not be enough. Seeing her hesitation, the young man spoke again, his voice quiet but firm. Do not fear our ways. They are not meant to bind you, but to guide you. If you choose to stay, you will learn step by step. You will see that partnership is not about power, nor about submission. It is about balance, respect, and shared life. Clara nodded, though uncertainty still lingered like a shadow. She wanted to trust him, to step into the life he offered, but she knew trust could not be demanded. It had to be earned. And yet something in his presence, something in the steady certainty of his gaze compelled her to stay, to listen, to consider that her journey had just begun in a way she could never have predicted. The air grew cooler as they reached a small garden at the edge of the village, where women tended herbs and vegetables with gentle care. He gestured toward the plants. Life here is practical, honest, and shared. Each person has a role, each action matters. If you choose to remain, you will see that your value is not measured by work alone, but by how you live among us, how you contribute to the balance of life. Clara stared at the garden, at the careful order and the subtle harmony of the village. She realized that this world was unlike any she had known, not just different but profound in its approach to life, love, and responsibility. Fear lingered, but beneath it a spark of curiosity and courage began to grow. Perhaps she could belong here not as a servant but as someone more, someone capable of partnership. She took a deep breath, feeling the weight of possibility settle over her. The path ahead was uncertain, tangled with tradition, expectation, and her own doubts. But it was a path she now felt compelled to walk, one step at a time, guided by the quiet certainty of the man beside her. The next morning, Clara awoke to the sound of children laughing and the soft clatter of tools in the distance. The settlement was alive with movement, each person absorbed in their tasks, yet all attuned to the rhythms of one another. She took a deep breath, feeling the weight of yesterday's conversation still pressing against her heart. The offer of partnership, the possibility of a life beside the young Apache man was no longer abstract. It hovered in the air around her, both thrilling and terrifying. She had decided to stay. Not yet to accept or reject what had been offered, but to earn the right to belong, to understand this world before committing herself fully. The first step, she realized, was to show that she could be trusted, not through words, but through actions. Her first task was simple in appearance, fetching water from the nearby river and carrying it back to the village. Yet even this demanded care, strength, and awareness. The riverbed was uneven, slick with stones, and the sun beat down mercilessly. As she balanced the heavy buckets in her hands, she felt the eyes of the young Apache man upon her. He did not speak. He simply observed, noting her steadiness, her determination, the way she adapted to the challenges of the task. By midday, she had helped prepare food, swept the communal areas, and even offered to assist the children with simple lessons. Though her own knowledge was basic and practical, every task was a test. Though she did not think of it that way, she was simply trying to contribute, to prove that her presence could be valuable in ways beyond mere survival. The young Apache man approached her during a brief pause in the work. "You do well," he said, his voice calm but approving. "Not because the work is perfect, but because you show effort and sincerity. That is more important than skill." Clara felt a small flicker of pride, though she quickly tempered it with humility. I just want to help," she admitted, her voice soft. "I want to learn. I want to be part of this," he nodded. "And you are." "Slowly, yes, but you are. Trust is not given. It is earned day by day through action and respect. You have begun that journey." The day stretched on, filled with small victories and quiet observations. She learned how to tend the small garden, how to light fires safely, and how to assist the elders without overstepping. The villagers began to respond to her efforts, First with cautious acknowledgement, then with faint smiles, and finally with quiet encouragement. She sensed that they were watching not only what she did, but how she did it, her patience, her attentiveness, her willingness to adapt to a world that was utterly foreign to her. As evening fell, the young Apache man invited her to walk with him to the edge of the mesa. The wind was cooler there, carrying the scent of sage and distant pine, and the sky was painted in hues of orange and purple. Silence stretched between them, comfortable and unspoken. "You have done well today," he said after a moment. "But know this, building trust is more than completing tasks. It is about understanding, observing, and becoming part of the life around you. You cannot force it and you cannot rush it. You can only live it." Clara nodded, the enormity of his words settling in her chest. She realized that this was about more than proving herself to him. It was about becoming part of a community that measured worth not by labor alone, but by presence, respect, and shared responsibility. For the first time since she had begun her journey, Clara felt a sense of belonging, however fragile. The work had been hard, the expectations unfamiliar, but each small accomplishment, each acknowledgement from the villagers, was a step toward something she had never truly experienced: connection. As they walked back to the settlement under the emerging stars, Clara understood that trust, like life itself, was built slowly, deliberately, and with intention. And in that slow, deliberate process, she was discovering something far more powerful than survival: the beginnings of acceptance, respect, and perhaps the faintest hint of love. Days turned into weeks, and Clara settled into the rhythm of life in the settlement. Her hands grew calloused from work, her muscles toned from hauling water and tending the garden, yet she felt a quiet satisfaction she had never known. Each day brought small triumphs: a child laughing at her clumsy attempts to teach, a basket she had woven surprisingly well, a fire she had lit that burned steady and bright. Slowly, the villagers began to treat her less like an outsider and more like someone whose presence mattered. And yet, even as she integrated into the daily life of the settlement, it was the young Apache man who occupied her thoughts most. He was never loud, never demanding, but his presence had a magnetic certainty that she could not ignore. He worked alongside others with ease, yet when he looked at her, there was a subtle attentiveness that made her pulse quicken, a quiet recognition, as if he saw not only her actions but the person behind them. Clara found herself watching him too, noticing the way he moved, the gentle care he showed toward the children, the patience with which he guided the elders. There was strength in him, yes, but also a tenderness that she had not expected. She felt a pull, a curiosity, and an admiration that she could not yet name. Every glance exchanged, every fleeting touch of hands while passing tools, seemed loaded with unspoken meaning, though neither of them spoke of it aloud. One evening, as the sun dipped below the mesas, Clara and the young Apache man worked together to repair a fence that bordered the communal grazing area. Their hands brushed occasionally, sending sparks of awareness through her, though they both pretended it did not matter. He offered a quiet instruction here, a guiding hand there, and Clara realized that she was learning not only practical skills, but lessons in trust, respect, and subtle intimacy. "You are improving," he said softly, his voice blending with the hum of cicadas and the whisper of wind across the plains. "Not just in work, but in presence. You are becoming part of the rhythm." Clara felt her cheeks flush, a warmth spreading beyond the heat of the day. I try," she murmured, unsure why her voice sounded so vulnerable. He glanced at her, a faint smile tugging at his lips, though his expression remained calm. "Try, yes, but it is more than effort. It is understanding, seeing without speaking, acting without expectation." Their eyes met briefly, and for a heartbeat the world around them, the children, the fires, the distant mesas, seemed to fade. Clara felt a strange, thrilling tension, the kind that comes when two people acknowledge a connection they dare not name. She had never experienced anything like it. She had never allowed herself to imagine that someone could see her, truly see her, and desire her as more than a helper or a stranger. As the fence was secured and they stepped back to admire their work, Clara realized that their unspoken bond had grown steadily, silently, amid shared labor and mutual respect. It was not romance as she had imagined from books or tales in her old town. It was deeper, subtler, woven into daily life, trust, and shared understanding. That night, as Clara lay on her blanket beneath a sky studded with stars, She replayed the day in her mind. Every glance, every shared word, every quiet moment of cooperation felt electric. She understood now that attraction did not always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it grew slowly, like roots beneath the soil, unseen yet powerful, shaping the ground and life above it. And in the quiet of her heart, she acknowledged a growing certainty that her life here, alongside him, could be something extraordinary. A life built not on servitude or fear, but on partnership, trust, and something neither of them had yet named, but both could feel. The calm rhythm of the settlement's life, which Clara had grown to cherish, was disrupted one morning by the arrival of strangers on horseback. They were traders, or perhaps opportunists from a nearby town, men whose eyes lingered too long, whose voices carried a sharpness that made the villagers uneasy. They called out to Clara in the distance, their words sweetened with false politeness, asking where she had come from, who she was, and why she remained among the Apache. Clara's stomach tightened. She had known this moment might come. The world beyond the settlement had rules and assumptions that did not match the quiet, ordered life she had begun to build here. The traders were curious, yes, but their curiosity felt invasive, almost threatening. She glanced around at the villagers, who watched silently, tension coiled in their posture, hands brushing subtly over the weapons at their sides. The young Apache man stepped forward, his presence commanding the attention of both his people and the strangers. His eyes narrowed slightly and his voice carried the calm authority that Clara had come to respect. "She is with us," he said firmly. "She is not for trade, not for discussion, not for judgment. She belongs here, and she is under our protection." The men from the town laughed, a low, cruel sound, but there was a hesitation in their stance. Clara realized then how much the settlement relied on unspoken respect, on the authority and confidence of its leaders, to maintain safety and order. The young Apache man did not shout or threaten. He simply made it clear that her place was with them, and that was final. Clara felt a rush of gratitude and something deeper, a protective warmth, tinged with awe. This was the man who had spoken of partnership and trust, the man who had seen her as more than a worker. Here he was, defending her with quiet, unshakable strength. It was a side of him she had not fully witnessed before, and it filled her with both admiration and a deepening sense of connection. The strangers grumbled, tossing suspicious glances at the villagers. They could see that they were unwelcome, and though they made a few more veiled threats, they eventually spurred their horses and left, their arrogance tempered by the unspoken boundaries of a community they clearly did not fully understand. Once the tension dissipated, the villagers returned to their routines, though Clara noticed a subtle shift. There were nods of acknowledgement, brief touches on her shoulder, and quiet words from elders that carried approval. She realized that the incident had not only tested her resolve, but had also strengthened her acceptance within the community. She was not merely tolerated, she was recognized as someone who belonged, someone worth defending. The young Apache man walked with her after the confrontation, his expression thoughtful, his voice quiet. "This is part of life here," he said. "Not all challenges come from the land or from labor. Some come from those who do not understand our ways or who see only difference as weakness. You must learn to navigate both." Clara nodded, feeling the weight of his words. She understood that joining this community meant more than learning tasks. It meant understanding loyalty, boundaries, and respect. It meant stepping fully into a world that demanded courage not only in work and partnership, but in the face of outsiders who might threaten her place. That evening, as the settlement settled into its usual rhythm and the sun dipped below the horizon, Clara reflected on what had happened. She realized that her connection to the young Apache man was not only emotional, but also a bond forged in trust and protection. His defense of her had been quiet yet absolute, and in that moment, she understood that partnership here was not merely a promise, it was action, courage, and the willingness to stand together against the world. For the first time, Clara felt the full gravity of what lay ahead. Life in the settlement was not a gentle path. It was demanding, unpredictable, and sometimes dangerous. Yet in facing these challenges, she also discovered the strength within herself, the same courage and determination that had brought her here, and a growing certainty that she could meet them, step by step, with him by her side. The morning air was crisp as Clara stood at the edge of the communal gathering area, watching the elders and the young Apache man prepare for the day's lessons. Today was different. There was an energy she could feel in the air, a tension mixed with expectation. She had been contributing steadily to the village, learning its rhythms and customs, but now it seemed the community had decided it was time to test her in a deeper, more meaningful way. The young Apache man approached her, his stride measured, his gaze steady. "You have done well in work," he said, his voice calm but carrying weight. "You have proven your willingness to help, to observe, to adapt. But there is more to life here than labor. To belong fully, you must understand what it means to be part of this community, not only in actions but in spirit." Clara nodded, her heart pounding. She had sensed that this day would come. She did not yet fully know what the test would entail, but she understood that it would measure her dedication not to her own survival, but to the shared life of the village. "You will spend the day with the elders," he continued. "Learn our customs. Learn our stories. Learn the ways we honor one another and the land. Observe, listen, and act according to what is needed without hesitation. This is your test." Clara swallowed hard. The elders were the keepers of tradition, the embodiment of wisdom and authority. To be entrusted with learning from them was an honor and a challenge. She felt a surge of nervousness, but beneath it a spark of determination. She had come too far to falter now. The elders guided her through their rituals, explaining the significance of each gesture, each word, and each action. Clara listened intently, absorbing not just the instructions but the philosophy behind them. She learned how to prepare offerings with care and reverence, how to speak and act with respect, and how to contribute to community decisions in a way that honored both tradition and practicality. Throughout the day, the young Apache man observed from a distance, his presence steady and reassuring. He did not interfere, allowing her to navigate the challenges on her own, yet she felt his support in every glance and every nod. At midday, she was asked to demonstrate her understanding by assisting with a small communal ceremony, one that symbolized unity, balance, and shared responsibility. Her hands trembled slightly as she followed the elders' instructions, but she focused on intention rather than perfection. Every action was deliberate, every word spoken with care. By the end of the ceremony, the elders nodded approvingly, acknowledging her effort, her respect, and her growing understanding of life in the settlement. Later, as the sun began to sink behind the mesas, the young Apache man approached her again. "You have done well," he said, his voice soft but firm. "Not everyone can move beyond tasks and labor to understand the life here. You have begun to grasp what it means to belong. This is only the beginning, but it is a strong beginning." Clara exhaled, relief and pride mingling in her chest. She had faced the test, not as an outsider seeking approval, but as someone striving to become part of something larger than herself. In the process, she had discovered resilience she had not known she possessed, and a deeper understanding of the rhythm and responsibilities of life in the village. As they walked back toward the settlement together, she realized that the test had not been about skill alone. It had been about commitment, humility, and willingness to embrace a new way of living. And as she glanced at the young Apache man, she understood that this journey of learning, respect, and shared life was also the path to the partnership he had spoken of, a life built not on expectation or servitude, but on mutual trust, understanding, and dedication. For the first time, Clara felt that belonging was no longer a distant hope. It was within reach, nurtured through effort, courage, and the willingness to step fully into a world that had once seemed foreign, now slowly becoming her own. The evening sun painted the mesas in rich shades of amber and crimson as Clara stood near the central hearth of the village. The day had been filled with work, learning, and reflection, yet her mind was restless with anticipation. She had completed the tasks, met the expectations, and shown her commitment, but now, the weight of what had been unspoken for weeks pressed on her. The young Apache man approached, his movements calm and deliberate. There was a new intensity in his gaze, a quiet certainty that made her pulse quicken. The villagers had begun to gather nearby, their presence respectful yet expectant, sensing the significance of what was about to unfold. Clara's heart thumped in rhythm with the soft crackle of the fire. He stopped before her, speaking directly, his voice clear and unwavering. "Clara, you have walked among us, learning not only our tasks but our ways, our values, our stories. You have proven your courage, your respect, and your willingness to be part of this life, not as an outsider, not as a servant, but as an equal, a partner. Clara's breath caught. She had imagined this moment countless times, yet the reality was overwhelming. She had never been acknowledged so fully, nor offered a place in someone else's world with such sincerity and care. He continued, his eyes never leaving hers. I offer you my life as a companion, my trust and my partnership. Not because it is easy nor because it is expected, but because I see in you someone whose heart and spirit align with mine. I ask you to join me, not as a servant, not as a visitor, but as my wife, my equal, and my partner in all that life will bring. The words hung in the air, solemn and powerful. Clara felt a rush of emotions, fear, exhilaration, gratitude, and a deep stirring sense of belonging. She realized that this was not a question of obligation or convenience, but of choice. This was an invitation to a shared life built on mutual respect, love, and understanding. Tears welled in her eyes, not from sorrow, but from the overwhelming recognition of what had been offered. She thought of the days she had spent learning, working, and integrating into the community, and of the quiet moments of connection with him. The unspoken glances, the shared labor, the subtle but undeniable trust that had grown between them. I accept, she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. I will join you not as a servant, but as your partner. I will walk with you, learn with you, and share in this life, whatever it brings. A faint smile touched the corners of his lips, a mixture of relief, pride, and tenderness. He reached for her hand, and for the first time, the gesture was not tentative or instructional. It was intimate, a quiet affirmation of the bond they had formed. The villagers nodded and murmured their approval, the elders giving silent, approving glances. Clara realized that she was no longer a stranger, nor merely an observer. She was part of the fabric of this community, woven in through respect, effort, and now, mutual love and commitment. As the firelight danced across their faces, she felt a profound sense of peace. The journey that had begun with trembling words asking for work had led her to a life she had never imagined, a life of partnership, belonging, and shared dreams. She knew that challenges would come, as they always did, but she also knew that she would face them not alone, but beside someone who had seen her truth and valued her wholly. And in that moment, with the young Apache man by her side, Clara understood the depth of what it meant to belong, not through obligation, not through survival, but through love, respect, and the courage to step fully into a life shared. The first light of dawn spread softly across the mesas, illuminating the settlement in gentle golds and pinks. Clara awoke to the familiar sounds of life, the children laughing as they ran to the communal hearth, the women quietly preparing food, and the men tending to tools and animals. But today there was a subtle difference. Today, she was not merely an observer, a learner, or a newcomer testing her place in this world. Today, she was fully part of it. The young Apache man, now more than a presence of authority in her life, approached her with a warm, steady smile. They walked together through the village side by side, their hands occasionally brushing, a quiet, unspoken intimacy threading between them. It was not a dramatic gesture, but a simple acknowledgement of partnership, trust, and shared responsibility. As they moved through the settlement, Clara noticed the way the villagers now greeted her, not with curiosity or caution, but with quiet acceptance. A child waved and ran up to show her a drawing. An elder nodded knowingly, and the women smiled with the warmth of inclusion. She realized that she had been woven into the fabric of this community, not through formalities or promises, but through daily actions, respect, and patience. The young Apache man stopped near the small garden she had helped tend, the one where she had first learned to contribute meaningfully to village life. He looked at her with calm certainty. "This is ours," he said softly. "Our work, our life, our shared future." Clara's chest swelled with a mixture of gratitude and awe. The journey that had begun with a trembling voice asking for work had led her here, to a place where she was not just surviving but thriving. She felt a quiet pride in herself, in her courage, and in the trust she had earned from a community that had once been foreign and intimidating. Together, they walked toward the horizon where the sun rose higher, casting light across the rugged landscape. Clara understood that life ahead would not be without challenges. There would be hardships, moments of doubt, and struggles to balance the demands of tradition with her own experiences and perspective. But she also understood that she would not face them alone. Hand in hand with the young Apache man, she felt a sense of completeness she had never known. Their bond was not built on obligation or convenience, but on mutual respect, trust, and love. It was a partnership forged through shared labor, understanding, and courage. A partnership that promised resilience in the face of whatever the future might bring. As they stood on the edge of the mesa, overlooking the settlement and the land that had become their home, Clara whispered to herself, a smile touching her lips, "This is where I belong." The wind carried her words across the village, mingling with the laughter of children, the hum of life, and the quiet strength of the people who had welcomed her. She had begun her journey trembling, asking only for work, and now she faced the future with steady heart and clear purpose. In the settlement's golden morning light, life stretched before her like an open, promising path, and for the first time, Clara knew that belonging was not just a dream. It was a living reality, built on trust, love, and the courage to step fully into a life shared. The world beyond the mesas could wait. Here in the heart of the community, with the man who had challenged her assumptions and awakened her courage, Clara's story had truly begun.